immigration detention, they call them detention centers. They're prisons. I've been to one in Georgia and one right here in Louisiana in Gina. And so I'm here to share a little bit of what I saw and heard there. But first, shortly after World War II, when the horrors that were caused by the xenophobia and nationalism and racism were still fresh in everybody's mind, our country helped establish and ratified the UN Convention on the Status of Refugees. It's part of our law, and it says that if you have a well-founded fear of persecution in the country where you live, you have to be given asylum. And we also signed on to the UN Convention Against Torture, which says that you can't be sent back to a country where you would be harmed if your government there is not able and willing to protect you. These are part of our laws, and people have the right to this. And yet our government is putting people in prison in order to deter them from claiming and enforcing their legal rights. And what I saw at the detention facilities reminded me of the horrors that these treaties were put in place to prevent right here in our country. And I agree with Mimi, this system of immigration detention is inconsistent with our basic American values. And as she said, there's no need to imprison most immigrants. Alternatives are available that not only are effective, but they would save huge expense to the taxpayer. It's an estimate that immigrants that don't pose a threat to society were released on supervision and monitoring, that we could save more than $1 billion a year. It's $1.4 billion that is being spent on these prisons, most of which are owned by private companies who are profiting and lobbying for more money to be spent on prisons. Most of these prisons don't have effective oversight from the government. They're usually put in remote rural areas. The ones in Louisiana are in Gina and in Pine Prairie, far away from the major places where there are immigration lawyers. And people detained by ICE don't have the right to appoint a counsel to represent them if they can't find and afford a lawyer. And they don't have a right to a prompt bond hearing. Speak up a little. I'll try. Anyway, I've seen two of these prisons, and I'll try the mic. Yeah. I've seen two of these prisons, and they're just horrible. And independent organizations have documented an inadequate medical care, lack of access to legal representation. I certainly saw that firsthand. Harassment and abuse from guards, use of segregation for punishment, inedible food, foul water, no activities or classes, and very restricted opportunities for visitation. And I talked to people that confirm these things at the two prisons that I visited. It's really a form of torture, and it's calculated to get people to give up and accept deportation rather than pursue their legal rights. And so I can give you some examples. At a prison I went to in Lumpkin, Georgia, which is 2.5 hours from Atlanta. So lawyers have to travel, and they have to get paid to travel. Imagine. I talked to a young man from Honduras who had fled with his 5 younger siblings from the police in Honduras, who had beat him up and threatened to come after his family on a date certain if he did not pay extortion to a gang of criminals. 2 of his family members had been murdered at the time he left, and since he was in prison in the U.S., another had been murdered. He turned himself in at the border, asking for asylum. When I saw him, he had been in prison for over 8 months. And the man, who was a young man, a young Hispanic man, cried in front of me and the other lawyer, who's also a woman, because of the way he was being treated, and he was just about ready to give up. I met another man who had just been released from prison on bond. And this is important to know, that 2/3 of the people living in the U.S. without documentation have been here for over 10 years. 20% of them have been here for more than 20 years. This man had come long ago legally, but he had not done the paperwork. He had documentation problems. He was living in Virginia. He was imprisoned in Georgia, far from his home. He had built a business with his sons. He had American sons and family. He was kept in immigration, and lawyers told me he was probably going to be able to adjust his status and have a legal right to stay here. He was held for 5 months in immigration prison. And the night he got out, he was so happy. His eyes were all red and inflamed. And he said they never turned off the lights in there. And he said a lot of the prisoners had eye problems. ICE had just dropped him off about 30 miles from the nearest bus station. He said, get back home. So I met so many people that have been taken away from their families and are just sick with worry, not just for themselves, but for their families. How are they going to get by with these people in jail? I met a woman from Central America, from down in the New Orleans area, who'd been working cleaning hotel rooms for the same hotel for 4 or 5 years. She'd been living in the same apartment for 4 years. Her American citizen husband was sick and not able to work. She had never been in jail before. She was terrified that he was not going to be able to pay the rent. They were going to lose their apartment. Okay, sorry. She cried as she told me her story. Well, I told you how much we'd save if people were just released to community supervision. And, So anyway, the people seeking to enter, as everybody knows now, at the border, actually, crossings of the border are lower than they've been in many years. I mean, not because of the policies now. They went down since 2006. They've been declining very steadily and reached a low in 2010 and 2011.
Must be because we're a shithole country.
Yeah. But the people that are coming over now, so I mean, there's no big crisis. It's fake news. And the people that are coming over now are mostly fleeing from the violence in Central America. Doctors Without Borders say these countries are currently experiencing unprecedented levels of violence outside a war zone, including murders, kidnappings, extortions, and the use of sexual violence as daily occurrences. So I just don't understand why we're insisting on imprisoning terrified refugees and hardworking people with family members here under cruel conditions when there are effective and much more humane and less expensive ways of making sure our immigration laws are enforced. Isn't it supposed to be America?
Yes.